Course laid in, sir. She's ready.
Engage.
Star Trek Infinite is a grand strategy experience that lets you play your own Star Trek story as the leader or ruler of one of 4 major factions in the Star Trek galaxy. But should you part with your cold hard cash and buy it? In this video, I'm going to review Star Trek Infinite and try to answer that question for you. First off, I need to say a big thank you to Paradox for giving me early access to Star Trek Infinite a couple of days ago. Without this early access, I couldn't bring you this review ahead of its release. Before we dive into my thoughts and feelings, let's explore what this game really is. If you've ever played Stellaris before, you might be noticing there are quite a few similarities between Star Trek Infinite and Stellaris. That is because Star Trek Infinite has taken a previous version of Stellaris, I believe Stellaris 3.1 from a couple of years ago, and then headed off in a slightly different direction. This game has not been developed by Paradox, it has been developed instead by Nimble Giant, an external development studio. Now, there are some things you could call this game. Some people are saying that it is a reskin of Stellaris. That wouldn't be entirely inaccurate. And to quote one of the producers on Stellaris, who has also been heavily involved in Star Trek Infinite, as all of you can easily identify, Star Trek Infinite is built on the Stellaris engine with little effort to hide it. Everyone on the Stellaris team has been giving feedback and tips since its inception, and they are all fully behind it. While Star Trek Infinite is not a Stellaris team project, it is a distinguished member of Stellaris Selective Kinship. There have also been rumblings in the Stellaris community, as there are a number of fantastic Star Trek mods already out there. Those mods are not going anywhere. Paradox has simply developed their own. In some ways it is a mod, it is a modification of the base systems of Stellaris with lots and lots of extras that modders simply, to be honest, would not be able to bring in. We'll get to those in a moment. When you start up a new game in Star Trek Infinite, you can choose between one of 4 factions. The UFP, the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Star Empire, and the Cardassian Union. You'll notice from the portraits here, this is basically the next generation era of Star Trek, and that's what you're going to be playing through. You won't be starting the game in the Enterprise era, and each of these 4 factions is already somewhat developed. The starting year is 2346. Each faction has their own region of space already. The Romulan neutral zone exists. The Romulan Empire has a truce with the Federation. The whole Khitomer thing has just gone down, and this region of the galaxy is now in a state of some political turmoil. Looking through this screen, and of course the planets, again, the similarities to Stellaris cannot be ignored. This is very much Stellaris with a twist. Lots of systems are very similar. We have city districts on our planets, industrial districts. We have spread or administrative capacity. You might remember that from back in the day. And hyperlanes are gone. Instead, our ships can travel around using their warp drives, which is more of a freeform travel option. You can also research and build various starship types that you will know and love from the main Star Trek series. As the game goes on, you will research bigger and probably more noteworthy ships. For example, here we have the Galaxy-class Enterprise, as well as the Sovereign. The artwork and the graphical models in this game are really, really good. It really does look and feel like the Star Trek universe. There are some new features that the main Stellaris game does not have, large areas of space weather which don't move and have really interesting effects. We have a plasma storm field over there, a hazardous dark matter nebula here, and a temporal distortion region up in the north. These space weather events are randomly generated every game, and that does give you some differences out in the wider galaxy as you go and explore the final frontier. Zooming out to the fullest galaxy map mode available, you'll notice that we can only explore the alpha and beta quadrants. Delta and gamma are completely beyond our reach and currently not simulated in this game. Quite a few of the systems in Stellaris have been streamlined, you could call it dumbed down. I don't really mind the wording you use, but they are less complicated. For example, with traditions, you only basically have 4 possible tradition picks and 4 ascension perk slots. You can pick one of 2 possible traditions. There is a finite choice here, and once you've gone into, say, commerce, you can't dive into welfare. Something new and unique is the mission tree, which I believe takes its inspiration from Europa Universalis 4. Each faction has their own mission tree, and generally at some point in the mission tree there is a branching segment where you can either follow the historical path, or similar to the equivalent in Hearts of Iron, you can go down an ahistorical path. With the Federation, instead of growing our Federation, we could empower Section 31, reform the charters, and then basically become the bad guys. Looking into the Federation's mission tree, you will notice that we have Extermination is Futile, where you must survive the crisis. There is an endgame crisis in Star Trek Infinite, and I don't know how you couldn't already guess this, but it is the Borg. The artwork on all of our planets definitely looks different, and that area of the game is really somewhere it excels. The art, and as I've already mentioned, the feeling is very evocative of Star Trek. Even the resources have been changed to reflect this. For example, our ships need deuterium in order to function. We can mine dilithium, tetrions, gravitons, nanites, and use them all in various technologies. We also have a new feature, which is officers. Officers are required on your ships in order to keep them functioning and to make sure that your ships can actually use their weapons, fly around, do all of the normal ship things. As you engage in combat, well, these officers can die and they will need to be replaced. That's why we have an officer income. You'll need to train them up across your worlds in order to get things going. Looking into the ship designer, you will notice again they've taken from Stellaris. A lot of these values seem very similar, but they have reduced and simplified things. Armor does not exist in Star Trek Infinite. Instead, we have shields, which have a very, very high refresh rate and hull points. To match this, there are basically two types of weapons. Anti-shield weapons that do less damage to hull, like phasers, and anti-hull weapons that do less damage to shields, like torpedoes. The combat balance in this game is somewhat interesting, but relatively straightforward to get to grips with. Research is exactly the same as the Stellaris model. You have 3 branches of research: physics, society, and engineering, and each branch will randomly roll new technologies. From those you can select one and then research them. We can interact with other empires using diplomacy to either declare war, form commercial pacts, research agreements, all of the normal Stellaris-like things. We also have a small number of internal policies we can change in our civilization. This is based on the policies in Stellaris. Some have been changed. For example, the trade policies give you quite a few more options. You can turn trade value in this game into research or directly into alloys, which honestly is really cool. But somewhere this game falls down a little bit is that we have quite a few policies locked off. I am playing with the Federation here, and because of that, my war policy is set to, I believe, defensive wars only, meaning I cannot claim and then go to war with any other empire except with a humiliation war. This definitely limits your gameplay options. As the Federation, unless you reform under Section 31, you will simply not be able to go on the offensive. I think I've covered enough of the game now so you get a good feeling of what it is like. Let's dive into what I think. Jumping straight back into this policy issue, it definitely was grating as a Stellaris player being unable to do anything with regards to offensive wars as the Federation. I understand it makes perfect sense from a thematic point, but if the AI empires don't declare war on you, and honestly, in one of my playthroughs, nobody was declaring war on anybody, it was a very boring and peaceful galaxy, well, in that case, there isn't much you can do. It then feels like a very static game. As I've already said a few times, the artwork and music is very immersive and very, very enjoyable. Artwork and the inclusion of franchise favorite characters like Picard, Admiral Nechayev, Agent Sloan, even Ambassador Spock is really thematic and so exciting and fun to play with. Unfortunately, because there is heavy carryover from the Stellaris engine, some things do at times feel a little immersion break. For example, Picard, when you recruit them, is just a regular Stellaris leader, so they start with a random age, I believe, which in this case is 34. Picard is of course leading the USS Enterprise, which you can send out on a mission to boldly explore the final frontier. That I absolutely love. By completing the mission tree, you'll also get access to other leaders like Worf, LaForge, Crusher, and more. There are also great scoping event chains in the game. For example, the Borg is not a regular crisis that just turns up at the end of the game. You will be encountering them almost from the very beginning and progressing through a series of events, missions, basically quests that will take you down a narrative path. And that's something I also want to bring up. The events in this game look beautiful. absolutely beautiful. There's fantastic, again, artwork. I think a lot of the time and attention has gone into artwork and making this game feel like it's part of the Star Trek universe. And from that perspective, they've, in a lot of ways, absolutely knocked it out of the park. They have been able to include so much more high-quality artwork, music, etc. that the Stellaris Star Trek mods are simply unable to do. They do not have the scope for that. My first couple of hours playing this game, I was absolutely enthralled and excited by everything that was happening. It was such an immersive Star Trek experience, and it was very, very fun. As I continued to play, I did, however, run into some showstoppers. For example, in this game, I wasn't able to continue with the Borg mission because a system I needed to visit was inside Cardassian space. I could not convince them to open borders no matter how much I was improving relations. And on top of that, I actually didn't know that it was the Borg event chain. It was the very first event, and so I sat on it for 30 years, unable to explore the system and progress forwards. Because of that, the chain was delayed, and it meant by the time I got to this event, contacting the Borg, Admiral Jean-Luc Picard had died of old age. Instead, we had Riker in charge of the Enterprise, and because of that, I was actually completely unable to go any further through the game with the Borg mission tree. That was very, very immersion breaking. On top of that, I ended up with 2 Rikers, and I'm not talking about Thomas Riker and William Riker, no. I had Riker and William T. Riker. Basically the same person, one an admiral commanding a random fleet, the other Riker having taken over the Enterprise. Oh, and Commander Data seems to be able to die of old age. Little things like that really did upset my immersion, but I'd like to hope these are bugs that Paradox will address and fix in the future. The Romulans, Klingons, and Cardassians can all research cloaking. You can then put cloaking devices on your ships. Unfortunately, as far as I've been able to tell, there is actually no way to utilize this cloaking device once it is on your ship. There is no UI interface to turn the cloak on, which, when I tried my Romulan playthrough, was very, very immersion breaking. Again, I believe this is a bug that Paradox will address, because I am hopeful Paradox will continue to support this game for some time to come. How about replayability? I'm honestly not sure how much replayability there really is. You can play one of 4 factions only. Each faction can branch in one of 2 different ways. I found that a pretty much full playthrough can take anywhere from around 4 to 8 hours depending on how much you're pausing and reading. I'm here at 2420, which is about 70 to 80 years after the game has started, and I've completely eclipsed all of the other major powers with absolutely no hope of them ever getting back into the game. And that's definitely an area where Star Trek Infinite lacks. Once you've outcompeted your local neighbors, and once you've dealt with the Borg threat, there's nothing else really to do in the game. The galaxy is filled with a small number of minor powers that will gradually grow, but overall, this kind of makes it feel pretty empty. What this game could really use is more factions to play with at the start of the game. An analogy I've been toying around with is that this game is somewhat like Hearts of Iron if you could only play as Japan, the United Kingdom, America, and Germany. And you could only play historical or ahistorical with a bunch of features pulled out. There are also times where the UI feels somewhat overcomplicated. For example, if you're used to Stellaris, looking at this planetary management screen, you might notice that we've got some jobs here with people working in them. I've got no way of expanding this tab. If I want to see how many extra jobs are available, I need to click on the job, and then I can look over here and either decrease or increase my job slots. That makes it somewhat difficult to do planetary overview at a glance, because I don't know how many extra technician jobs I really need to add. A number of other gameplay and UI improvements that we've had over the years in Stellaris simply aren't available in Star Trek Infinite. As a Stellaris player, that definitely can feel grating. Do I think that you should buy Star Trek Infinite? Well, that depends on who you are. If you've never played Stellaris before, if you're interested in dipping your toe into the grand strategy waters, and you're a massive fan of Star Trek, you love the thematics, you love the scene setting, and you want to dive into this world, I think you'll find Star Trek Infinite pretty fun. It has a $30 or €30 price tag, and I think you'll get at least 20 to 30 hours of play out of this game before you're having to replay the same factions and make the same choices again. If you like doing that, you could possibly get hundreds of hours of play out of this game, but there is only one starting scenario, only one universe to explore. If you've played Stellaris before and you quite like that game, but you're not sure if you're really interested in the setting, you're not a massive Trekkie, then I probably don't think this game is going to be for you. You'll have a lot more fun with Stellaris, and if you want to find something to spend your $30 on, I'd probably point to getting some extra Stellaris DLC to improve your replayability with that game rather than trying to dive into this one. We also mustn't forget that if you own Stellaris, you can have a Star Trek experience by getting one of these Star Trek mods and playing that way. Some of those mods offer a lot more in terms of mechanics to the game. They have many more factions you can play as, they have the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta quadrants to play in, and they have a much more fleshed out timeline to play through. Stellaris Infinite does only have 4 factions, and it can start to feel relatively stale after you've been playing for quite a few hours, and there is no one else out there to compete with. I think what this game really needs is the Dominion, additional factions out there in the galaxy who are also major powers that you can play with and interact with. For example, making the Borg a playable race would be fantastic. And without those inclusions, the game does sometimes feel a little narrow in scope. Jumping back to look at what the developers have said about Stellaris and why they didn't make this game simply a DLC for Stellaris, they wanted to make it a standalone, rather than part of Stellaris. They wanted this game to have its own track and not cause limitations on Stellaris, or Stellaris cause limitations for it. Stellaris should continue to evolve as the best sci-fi sandbox strategy game in existence, and Star Trek Infinite should be the definitive Star Trek strategy game. Mods are already being made, and they have full Steam Workshop support. The developers will be paying a bit more attention to their terms and conditions, but they have not made major changes to the existing one. Overall, I'm pretty sure we're going to get more DLC added to this game, which in the end will add much needed replayability. Getting the Dominion included, as I've mentioned, getting the Borg, getting those extra quadrants, getting a few more major powers included that aren't right next to us in the Alpha and Beta quadrant, but we can meet and discover over time, would be great. I absolutely love how there is a scenario you can start with here, and honestly, I wish we had a Stellaris game with a scenario like this. Possibly something like a Fall of Empire, I'm looking at you, Foundation series, something like that where you could play in a galaxy with a galactic empire that's falling apart. I hope this video has helped you decide whether or not this new Stellaris Star Trek game, Star Trek Infinite, is for you. If you do decide you want to purchase Star Trek Infinite and support this channel, you could do so by following the link down in the description below to Humble Bundle and purchasing it there. Actually, following that link and purchasing anything from the Humble Bundle store will help support this channel. If you've enjoyed this video, but you'd like to see more Star Trek Infinite gameplay, then I recommend you check out the link on screen now. In that video, I have played through over 2 hours of Star Trek Infinite as the Federation, and you get to see all the gory gameplay details.